Hey everyone, Mad Tractor Guy's Garage here today, and we're doing it today. We already started early this morning, pulling out drive shafts, did a little bit of wiring disconnect, got the exhaust pipes all disconnected, and I'm doing a little bit of wiring at the moment. Got to finish unhooking the transmission wiring up under there. Got a couple of connections to undo there, and then I just got some mounting bolts there, the engine mounting bolts. And then we should be, I got the transcoil lines all undone. I just got to finish snaking this one out. But other than that, everything that holds this engine in is almost out, and we're going to be getting ready to pull her out here. And then once we get this out, we can kind of clean the frame up a little bit. I'm kind of wash it all off with the pressure washer and get it a little bit less greasy and nasty, so that way we can start getting the new engine mocked up and get her going. The other thing before I can put this engine in, though, I've got to do a few little things to get it finished set up. I just got to make sure my clutch is aligned fully, and then I've also got to quickly pull off my adapter here and finish welding the plate itself that holds the transfer case on. The internal adapter isn't quite done yet, but it is done enough to where I can have it mocked up at least, and at least get the transmission stabbed on into the truck. So yeah, moving right along here. And also last night I started mocking up a little bit of wiring here. Got the alternator wiring all hooked up here. I've got to still figure out exactly where this is going to go, because I am going to be removing the fusible links that this uses and switching it over to maxi fuses. But I got to figure out placement of all this yet, because I don't quite know where the thing that goes kind of here-ish fender is going to sit. So we still got that to figure out. But then I also got it ran over and got the AC clutch wiring set up, and I'm in the process of also hooking up the gauge wiring for the temp sender, oil pressure sender. And then it hasn't come yet, but right here I also have to run wiring to what's going to be my fan control switch, because obviously we're not running electric fans here. Got to run a switch in here to tell the electric fans when to turn on. And this is actually going to be what they call a trinary switch, to where it's not only going to tell the fans when to turn on, but it's also, when the fans come on, is going to turn the AC compressor on. So I got to get that switch coming and finish getting it wired in. But other than that, we're moving right along with getting this set up. So I realized in the last clip I actually misspoke about what we're doing with the fan setup here. I am actually running two electric fans kind of sitting about here and about here. We're not running a mechanical fan on this setup, which is why I need to run a switch right here that is going to tell those electric fans when to turn off and when to turn on. The switch itself is actually called a trinary switch, because it's not only going to tell the fans when to turn on and off just by the temperature in the water neck, it's actually also going to tell the fans to turn on whenever the AC clutch is engaged. So basically it will function as not only a temperature switch, but it will also function when the clutch is engaged and when the AC system is going to be running, to help make sure enough air gets pulled through the radiator support to make sure that the AC functions correctly. And that's going to be all controlled by the switch that's going to go right here. So I've got to, that switch still hasn't arrived yet, like I said, so I've got to, once that comes in, I can get that plug pulled out, put the wires in there, and have that running through the main harness. Well, it's a little bit later now. Got this pulled out. So now we got a pretty well cleaned and stripped engine bay. I went ahead and also got the section in there that covers the transmission tunnel pulled out, and got the one engine mount pulled out. Still got the other one. It's unfortunately riveted. I don't know why the one's bolted in and the other one's riveted in. I don't know. They just reasons, I guess. But this is all now pretty well ready. We're gonna then hook the transmission up into the motor, and then take the whole thing, stick it in here, and start figuring out where I got to cut, modify, and adjust, because I basically have to likely remove from about here probably forward in order to clear the oil pan. So we'll have to see kind of where all that lands, though, as we get the motor placed. So we're moving right along, though. All right, well, end of the first night. We got a motor hanging in here now. Got a few things also we got to deal with straight away. First off, probably going to pull this fuel filter housing off. Just give us some more room, make things a little easier. Next thing we're going to do is actually go ahead and just get rid of this mounting plate here. Just don't need it. It's going to serve us no purpose, and it's getting in the way. So we're just going to get rid of it, cut the rivets off, and discard it. So probably also going to have to do some firewall clearancing. Hopefully not a ton, but just, you know, a little bit, probably in and around this section here, just to give us a little more room. But overall, we're getting it in there. Yeah, it's fine. We got a whole mess of stuff set up here that's looking really good at the moment. So I think at the moment we are going to call it for the night, and we'll pick it up in the morning and continue on with this. But overall, things are looking really good. Alright, well, a little more time has passed than initially intending, but the engine is now actually sitting in the truck for the front section of it. So when you last saw it, we had the motor kind of sitting in the truck and just like loosely hanging out, kind of in about here-ish position, hanging out in front of the truck. And so we've now gone a little bit further in the progress, and we've actually got the front of the motor sitting on a cross member. So we'll take you up in here. It's a little snug. You can kind of see I don't got a ton of free play in there. I can about fit my finger in there, and that's about it. But these dampeners really won't move that much anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. And what we did here is I put this cross member in. This is 1.5" square tube, 250 wall, so real heavy duty. And then I got some 1/4" plate that's welded to it here, and 2 1/2" grade 5 bolts on either side, securing it to the frame rail. So this is good and heavy. I may come back in later and on this side, from basically from here to here, put a kind of a kicker piece to kind of brace this a little bit more under the frame. More so, not so much to give the engine more support, but to help tie the frame together a little better, because as I had to do, the cross member, you can kind of see, is pretty well removed out of there. You can kind of see there's just this front section left. The whole rest of it's all been cut away from pretty much here and there back, to give myself enough room for the motor to sit in there. And I've got to remake a locating bracket for the track bar right here. Once I get that done, though, I will start to rebuild this cross member. But if I turn you around here, you can kind of see the way the mount is it's this piece of box section, and then there's a piece of plate steel right up here that the actual mount holes are drilled in, and then there's these connecting pieces here and here that all kind of tie this plate into this main tube here. And this is all 1/4" plate, and obviously 250 wall tubing, so good and heavy for the front end of this thing, and should do a good job of supporting it. So now we're going to go ahead and start moving on to the rear engine mounts. To go over into the truck here, you can kind of see I've also made a few well, we'll call them deletes. Floor delete has been engaged kind of in this area, and you can kind of see this is the rear engine mount, and the frame is right here. And I've got actually a template that I've had a buddy of mine helping me make up, a mount that's going to sit in here, bolt to the frame, in basically kind of in this area here. And then we'll have obviously a puck that sits under it here to hold this. Now the other thing that we figured out, as you can kind of see, the transmission is not, I need to recenter the engine now that it's actually bolted in the front of it. But as you can kind of see, we're getting into a little bit of a tight clearance in here, specifically just on this section, and it's actually also partially beat down. I need to pull it back up because I damaged it a little bit as I was getting the motor in here. But one thing we're also actually going to go ahead and do is, this floor was patched right in here. I did it back when I was 16, and it's a not horrible patch job, but it was also using some patch panels that didn't hold up nearly as well as I'd hoped them. And you can kind of see I painted them and really did as best as I could to protect them, and they're already coming apart and really starting to flake through, and you can kind of see how thin I was able to poke a hole in it just with, you know, taking this and kind of poking it. So that same buddy that's been helping me with this is also really good at sheet metal fab, and has an English wheel. And so we are going to actually go ahead, and since this is already damaged and I need to redo the floor or modify the floor to fit all of this, as well as the clutch pedal or the clutch throwout arm that's sitting right here, we're just going to go ahead and cut this whole floor pan out from basically up in here and come down and around and go up to kind of this area in here and cut out this whole big floor pan and remake it out of one brand new piece of sheet metal that will incorporate all of the different changes we needed to make in order to fit the engine in there. But if we go on the other side here, you can kind of see my lighting's not the greatest, but I've got plenty of room here. The trans fits in the tunnel just fine. There's no clearance issues in the tunnel other than just slightly right in here that I've got to address. So other than that, this is kind of how we're looking at the moment. I'm going to start off now. I'm going to square the motor. The motor in the front is already squared. I'm going to square the transmission up in the frame, and then I can start actually making my mounts and go forward with that. I had a question at one point that I want to actually address too with this is when you look at it end on, there is some question as to how I was going to position the motor, because for those of you that don't know, oftentimes, I know specifically Ford did this, and I know several other manufacturers did this as well. The center line of the motor, if you look at it straight on in the front of the truck here, I lined my center line up in between the frame rails to where the crankshaft sat centered in between them. Looking at the motor, sometimes it's easy to think it's actually offset because the valve cover on these does not sit center line with the crank. It's actually offset by about 2 or 2.5 inches. But from factory, a lot of these trucks, and if you noticed earlier in the frame, or looking at the floor pans, you could see this, the engines oftentimes sat offset to the passenger side slightly to give a couple of benefits. Namely, it was hoping to distribute weight a little bit better. Sometimes it was to also do a little bit more clearance for the front axle. Sometimes it was also to help clear a front drive shaft. An engine on centerline sometimes will have issues with the engine sitting too far over and hitting the drive shaft. This should not, according to the measurements that I took, so we should be okay to do this. I'm also going to be potentially reclocking the transfer case. I have it sit at a factory clock at the moment, but I may end up going back in and changing it to down a little bit just because of how different this whole conglomeration is as compared to a factory unit. So that's kind of where we're at now. This is all more or less done. So now we're going to move back and start getting the rear mounts in, the transmission mounts in, and just continue working backwards, getting all that done. I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to cut this video off for the next segment of it, but the kind of game plan that we're going to try to follow is once I get the engine fully bolted into the frame and the transmission fully bolted into the frame, we're then going to switch gears a little bit, no pun intended, and get the engine all full of oil, get it the new filters put on it, get the trans full of oil, and get it all set up. I'm also going to then hook up the clutch linkage, and we're going to get the clutch set up and working. We're going to go into some of the fuel connections for this, getting the fuel lines run, getting the twin tank switch more or less figured out, and then also we're going to dive into doing a little bit of wiring to start getting that sorted out, because as you can see, I don't have a lot of it yet, but I'm starting to get some spaghetti going on here, and yeah, we're going to try to avoid that. So, and with this, a lot of the major parts of the engine circuitry have changed. The alternator on a factory application would have sit where the AC compressor is, and the AC would have gone over where the alternator is. And I did this specifically more for convenience. The AC compressor does not fit where the alternator would sit without hitting the lines. And since I didn't want to mess with these injection lines, we just switched them over. And this is also going to work good anyway, because the alternator sitting on this side also lines up with the starter on this side, and basically is going to make this side be where the primary battery sits. And so we're going to have to do a whole lot of switching around, basically taking everything and take what would have been originally over here, put it over there, what was over there, bring it over here. So that's all going to be, though, in probably a future video. I'm probably going to cut this. Maybe I might put one other segment in once I get the rear of the engine mounts done. But we'll split it up here and start to break things up as we start going on some of that. But yeah, we'll keep going, and I'll update you as I get some more progress. Alright, well, to cap off kind of where we left off, and probably what we'll finish up with this video, I made a little bit more progress here. I got the shutdown solenoid wired in. I actually went and got the correct connector for it, so it's wired in on this side, and it's partially wired in on the plug here. I've got the hot and the or the what would be the hold wire and the ground hooked in, although I have to do some changes to the wiring back in the harness a little bit. And the only one I have left to do is I have to add in the wire here for the pull-in solenoid, which is going to be triggered off of the starter solenoid here. But I have to also, when I do that, it's going to run through the fuse box here to fuse it. That way I get myself a little more protection. Also, I have to look into what I have to do in between these 2 points to avoid an issue with backfeeding, or if the starter sticks. I know there's some other things you have to take into account running it straight off of the solenoid here, so I got to do a little more research to figure that out. But other than that, the engine electrical here is pretty much done. All of this is done. I still have to get that one switch that I've been trying to get for a while to come in for my AC. And once I get that in, though, that will pretty much complete most of the engine wiring, and we can start to move on to some of the other stuff. As for mounting the engine, if we come over here, I've made headway on a couple of the brackets here. This is the one for the driver's side, and the one for the passenger side is down somewhere. Things get a little hectic around here sometimes. This is the passenger side bracket. This is the driver's side bracket that is going to mount the motor, and unfortunately it's not quite as pretty as I would like it to be. I don't unfortunately have a lot of fancy plasma cutters or water jets or whatnot that I can use to do this, so it's just cut out with a torch. And for what I'm doing, this is honestly going to be just fine, and it's going to be good and strong welded. I've already welded a couple of them solid, but I've left several of the places just tacked till I can fit up the plate itself, and then if I need to adjust the angle that this is going to sit out of, basically all the relationship of all these parts, I can still do that. And basically what this is going to do is this is going to sit up with the back of it here bolting to the frame rail with 4 bolts, actually replacing 2 of the rivets for the one cab mount, and then adding 2 more bolts. And then up top here are going to get 2 more bolt holes drilled to go into the top of the frame. And I have to clearance this a little more too and shape this rough edge to fit into the frame profile. But basically the idea is that we'll have 6 bolted connections per side. So with that, and then the engine sitting right on this plate here, you see I have kind of a rough hole marked out, but we'll get it bolted in first, and I'll show you how that all lines up before we punch these holes to make sure we get them in the right spot. But overall, this is looking really good. I've got a few other little things to do with this. I'm going to actually add also a gusset plate in here just to make it a little bit more beefy. This is already 1/4 inch plate, and it's going to get fully welded, so this is already going to be pretty strong. But I just want to make it as bulletproof as I can for stuff like this that I can do my best on. But the way that kind of sits in there, if we come around here, is using the passenger side one that is farther along. It has already been clearanced, and I just have to finish fully welding it. This mount tucks up into the frame, basically right up in this area, up and around here. And I'll show you that once we get it actually bolted in. But it's going to sit with an isolator in this hole, and then these are the brackets that bolt to the motor, which sit basically like this one bolted up to the motor. So the theory is that with an isolator in between the two, these will sit kind of about like that, holding the motor up and hopefully giving us a good stable foundation. Now, I have had some people comment asking if I was just going to do the rear and the front cross member and not have a rear transmission cross member, because in the medium duties that these would have originally come in, they do not run a rear transmission cross member. They rely strictly on the front and rear engine cross members to hold the weight. And for me, I figured that I could probably do that, but with the fact that the motor and the transmission is not all that's in here, and that I'm going to be adding that transfer case to the back, and it's pushing how much farther out the whole thing is leveraged here, I just figured I'm going to actually add a transmission cross member just to give myself some more support and to help take some of the stress off of some of the transfer case and the bolted connections, because a lot of it is only aluminum and cast magnesium, so it's something I don't want to risk putting a bunch of pressure on and have a failure. So we're going to be working on that a little later though, once we get a little farther on this. But yeah, we're moving right along here, and hopefully when we bring you back the next time, we will be getting the cross members installed. We'll probably, or excuse me, the rear engine mounts installed. We'll be probably cutting out most of this floor here hopefully soon, to not only give ourselves some room to get the clutch linkage working, but also to help make sure we can position the engine correctly. So yeah, I appreciate y'all watching, and we will hope to see you on the next one.